Welcome to Love What You Love. I'm Julie Rose. I'm insatiably curious about people and the world around us, and I'm absolutely in love with passion and unselfconscious enthusiasm. Every other week, I geek out with someone about the thing that they love, and then I share it with you. Welcome back, or welcome. I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn that Love What You Love guest alumni are doing some amazing things. You might recall episode 20 guest Brittany App talking about the making of her documentary film. Well, it is now out in the world. Check out wheretherewaswater.com for more details on where you can see her work. Episode 6 guest Stephanie Candelaria and her band La Mera Candelaria just released their latest EP and a collaboration with LA's Violence Intervention Program, which includes a video and a fundraiser. You can learn more on their Instagram, la.mera.candelaria. I just love to share the wonderful things that Love What You Love guests get up to. If you want regular updates, you can follow me on my Instagram, Julie K. Rose Author. So, speaking of wonderful, let's meet this week's guests. Tamarah and Tiphani are identical twin sisters who cosplay under the names Pro and Con, and they are a delight. I had so much fun chatting with them about embodying a character, the intersection of craft and performance, making realistic armor out of foam, the challenges of being a person of color in the cosplay world, 8-foot-tall costumes, articulating wings, and so much more. So find out why Pro and Con love cosplay, and why you might learn to love it too.
Absolutely. My name is Tamarah, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
My name is Tiphani, and my pronouns are also she, her, hers.
Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so fascinated by cosplay, and I really don't know much about it, but I'm just fascinated that people do it. So I want to find out, maybe for folks who are listening who don't really know what cosplay is, maybe we could start with what is cosplay and how did you guys get into it?
Sure. So cosplay is basically the act of putting costumes on your body, usually to represent a fandom that you're interested in, be that anime, movies, games, music, any of that kind of thing. And it's even if you create your own character. So it's just basically the art of putting costumes on your body to celebrate characters that you really enjoy, or I guess you would hate, just to celebrate.
It actually started here in the United States in the 1930s, and then at a science fiction convention. And I'm, wish I had pulled up the info because I'm blanking on names, but right, this woman and her fiance or boyfriend at the time were the first people to ever cosplay at this science fiction convention, and then it just took off worldwide, and then a while later, the term cosplay itself was actually coined in Japan. And so, it's kind of just taken off as this sort of global phenomenon. There are people who do it for money. There are people who do it for fun. It's truly a choose your own adventure type of thing. And then the two of us got into it actually, like 2006 or 5 or so.
Yeah, well, we went to a convention. A friend had told us, hey, there are these things called conventions where it's a place where you can go and buy merchandise from your favorite stuff or, dress up. And we're thinking about going. You guys should come too. And we thought that you'd look really weird if you weren't in cosplay. So we went thinking we actually had to. So we put together these really, really busted costumes. If anyone's familiar with the series Rurouni Kenshin, it's an anime / manga from Japan, obviously. And there was a character called Kaoru Kamiya. And we were her, and we wore these yukata that we purchased from Epcot Center a couple of years prior to when we went on vacation, and it was just a mess. But we had such a great time, and they were pretty well received despite how busted they were. And it's been a love ever since. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so many questions. So now, did you to dress up when you were kids? Did it come out of a desire to craft or make things? Did you always like to dress up, or was it more like making costumes or crafty things?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've always been relatively artsy people. We had dolls and things like that growing up. We always enjoy a good costumey moment. And my mom is a really strong artist. But I think, we were growing up at least relatively shy people as well. So the whole sort of theatrical performance thing of it didn't really connect with us until much later in life. But yeah, I think the opportunity to this is another way to express art, painting and markers and, that kind of other sort of physical media is one really great way of expressing art, but this sort of fashion designy sewing piece is another. So we really connected, I think, in that way.
Yeah, and we played dress up as kids a lot. Like I remember we'd get like our mom would give us like old clothes and our grandma would too, and we'd put on like earrings and like, pretend to be different characters. So it was like fun to do that at home, but never like as a, as like in a group like that until we got older. But yeah, and our grandma taught us how to sew. By hand. And I think I took like one home ec class, like in middle school. But after that, yeah, it just was so much fun getting to like, and we were nerds too, like growing up. We liked anime and video games and that kind of thing. So it was like a natural like marrying of all those things that we like to do to get together in cosplay.
Yeah.
What was your kind of entree into anime and, nerd culture?
Ooh, probably Pokemon, don't you think? Maybe Pokemon was like maybe before I could actually name what it was. I think we watched a lot of cartoons growing up, but Pokemon was like the first anime we watched. And I remember being super obsessed with it in like the 3rd grade. I was obsessed. Every Saturday morning I would get up and watch Pokemon. When we were back in school, it came on at like 4:00. So I'd set the tape recorder to like record it when it came out so I wouldn't miss it. Toonami was really big back then, so we watched like Dragon Ball Z and like
Gundam Wing and all the Gundam series. My gosh,
Zoids and like so. Then we got like game systems after we got older and like middle school maybe. I think middle school or like early high school. We got like our first system, like which is an N64. So we were really excited to play that, and yeah, ever since we've just been giant nerds.
I love it. I love it. So are there like different categories of cosplay, and is anime the biggest category, and kind of what drives the different categories in popularity?
Yeah, good question. Cosplay is one of those kind of, you make your own adventure kind of thing. There's some sort of like overarching, like, I guess, themes with cosplay and how folks can cosplay, but you can really do whatever you want to with it. I think it started obviously like in that sort of pop culture sort of comic book era, but then it definitely expanded and is very popular in the anime arena. There's a couple of different types of conventions, right? You've got the comic cons, you've got the anime conventions, you've got like sort of steampunk conventions, more Ren Fair types of events, like the horror shows, all those sorts of different types of media genres have their own types of conventions and their own types of costuming. But I think, in the cosplay world, you can kind of choose to be in one or all or however you want to do it. And I think it breaks down even further to sort of how people cosplay. We both really like the craftsmanship element. So we're big on, making our own wearable art out of raw materials. Other folks like to buy their costumes, which is totally great too. There's a lot of really good makers and vendors out there that sell costume supplies. Other folks are really into modeling or being sort of social media personalities. There's no real wrong way to do, and all of those sorts of things kind of fit into, the anime group, the Comic-Con group, the horror group, all those sorts of ways. So
yeah, and there's like a lot of different ways you can get involved with cosplay too. So not only do you just get to wear it to conventions, but like, you said you could wear them to different events like Ren Fair. There's cosplay contests that we both really like to participate in, so you can show off your skill and hopefully win some prizes here and there. So there's just so many different ways of getting involved. I don't think you have to really like one particular thing in order to jump into it, but I think that's the good thing about cosplay too, is that there's so many different types of media, but there's also so many different types of ways of enjoying cosplay itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the contests, are those at the cons? Are those like, you take pictures and show your process, or how do the contests work?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. I think it started out at conventions. Like that was like the main place to enter a contest was at cons, but it's expanded more, especially since COVID-19. There's been more ways of engaging. But the nuts and bolts of it is there's a couple of different types of contests. You have your performance-based contests and you have your craftsman-based contests, and you've got your contests that kind of marry the two. So for performance-based contests, usually you can make or buy your costume, show up, do some kind of skit or stage walk that represents your character really well, that oohs and ahs the audience and the judges. So that's based on your representation, physical body acts of, manifesting this character on stage. The craftsmanship-oriented contests are showing off the different types of skill you have in terms of making. So that can be sewing, it can be using foam. EVA foam and foam materials are really popular for making armor, as well as like other kind of hard props. So whatever it is you do to put your costume together using a bunch of raw materials, You get graded, judged, I guess, with other people within your class. There's different classes for cosplay contests based off of experience and the number of awards you've won. The classes kind of generally fall into beginner/novice, where you haven't won too many awards or none at all. Then you've got your intermediate or journeyman level, where you've maybe won a couple of awards. And then you've got your master class, who have won, multiple 3, 4, 5 awards up until. And professional cosplayers tend to fall into this category as well. You make money off of your costumes. So they kind of place you loosely into those classes. And then you can compete for different prizes based off of that.
And it's an international industry as well. There's costume contests right here in the United States. There's contests hosted at libraries. There's contests that are multi-continent. So, each country has its own qualifier and they compete at some kind of international contest. There's several of those. So it's its own sort of co-culture within cosplay, I think, as well.
What compels you to want to embody a character?
That's a good question. Sometimes we do it for the nature of the contest. If that's what it requires, we'll do it. But I think a lot of people like to tap into that play part of cosplay. So if, for example, you super love Batman, you just love Batman's origin story, you love him as a character, being able to act out that character on stage and really showcase your love, I think, is a special passion project for a lot of folks. And so they all go through the lengths of finding appropriate background music. They're perfecting their stage walk to really emulate Batman and make that audience believe that is Batman walking across the stage. And I think the cosplay community is home to a lot of theater people, or theater transplants, people that like to be in the theater and act as well. So it's really fun that they get to marry those two things together and walk the stage and work it. It's all about celebration of fandom. And so, a lot of people enjoy the fandom based off of what they see on TV. So getting to mimic that and replicate that is what I think drives a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think, people really get into it too. You get people who kind of do this sort of standard 3-point walk on the stage. You kind of step, pose, step, pose, step, pose. But each of those poses really representative of the character, all the way to people who build these elaborate, moving, transformative backdrops and stages and props. It's almost like a miniature, minute to 2.5 minute, movie, if you will, or stage performance. Like a true theatrical situation to really sell that character to the judges and the audience. And I think, a lot of folks really get drawn into that, of just really creating a sense of connection between the audience and that character, even if the audience has never seen that character before, right? Like really selling, like, I'm Batman. You may never have seen a single Batman story in your life, but like, you're gonna know who Batman is or be interested in Batman by the end of that performance.
You guys do a lot of, you're focused on the craft as well. So why an anime character versus like recreating an 1830s gown? Is it just the pure love of character and wanting to be close to or feel like you're part of that world?
That's a good question.
I think for us personally, we just kind of pick whatever strikes our fancy. Whatever we like doing.
Yeah. I think, anime, I have a closer connection, I think, to pop culture things than I do most, like, of sort of specific historical costuming. I enjoy historical costuming elements for sure, but I think what's nice with cosplay is it is a lot about that specific character representation, right? Like, you're taking an individual media source that exists in real time that other people have seen, as opposed to kind of creating, a random character in history. I think there's just sort of a different way of thinking about it that really appeals to people. Now, there are certainly people, I know quite a few folks who love historical costuming in general, and they are really drawn to, like, okay, well, how can I, make an 1830s Angelica Pickles, right, from Rugrats or something. Like, how can I
sure, like a mashup kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it just kind of depends, I think. But I think for us, there's a lot of fun. I think we tend to do recreations of existing characters, and I think it's just a lot of fun because if you look at a media source, right, like, these characters are largely cartoons, so the proportions are exaggerated, or there's just no zipper. So how are you going to get in and out of this costume, right? Or like, oh, like, okay, this skirt is, 200 inches in diameter. Like, how are we going to make this work? Like, how can you fit through a door? And so kind of just trying to figure out how to transpose a cartoon or a media source onto a human body is an interesting and fun challenge, I think. Especially when it comes to video games. We tend to cosplay from like the Final Fantasy series. So all the costumes have just
A stupid number of details.
It's stupid. I'm just like, what is happening? Like, what? There's belts, there's buckles. If you look really closely at this buckle, it's not actually a functional buckle. Like, there's no hole it actually goes through, but like, you have to look at hours of reference images to figure that out. And I find that kind of stuff like really interesting and fun.
We had problems. But yeah, I agree. It's like a puzzle trying to figure out how to get this weird thing to fit onto your body that doesn't match these proportions from whatever it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's fun to like you said earlier, Tamarah, like taking you could even do a costume like Angelica Pickles and then try and make that into like an 1830s like dress. Trying the logistics of making it look right is a lot of fun too in a lot of ways. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can tackle it.
So you say you kind of like whatever catches your fancy at that moment, but like what is that moment of inspiration like where you're like, yeah, I love this particular character or whatever. I have to spend the next 40 hours working on this costume, or however long it takes.
So many hours. I love that question because at least for us in particular, we're drawn to like really gaudy, obnoxious, like lots and lots of detail. Like if it is gonna take 100 hours of beating, like we're in. And I think most of the time too, we joke that all of our cosplay projects start out like a 3 a.m. conversation of like, it'd be funny if we did X. And then we're like, nah, we can't do that. And then we do it. Right. So I think in particular, we were, one piece that we look at too is, right, what are we doing it for? Right. If it's for a contest, we want to make sure that the piece is, represents a lot of technicality and a lot of different skills that we have. So, we both are pretty apt at, sewing work and foam craft. So we try and incorporate both of those things so that there's more for judges to look at. We also like, resin casting or, smocking or wig styling, all of these sorts of different mediums. We try and making shoes, anything we can do to kind of incorporate into the overall piece. If it's just for fun, we also think about kind of, what is the stage performance going to look like, right? Like, do these characters go together, or is there something that we can work with that's within our own, ability level to get to translate to an audience? If it's for fun, then we also think, hey, what's going to be like if we're judging a cosplay contest, can I judge in a ball gown? Probably not. So we got to figure out something that's like going to fit in a standard doorway.
And if we're hanging out, like we're twins, we're identical twins. So sometimes we like to pick costumes and characters that mimic that. We were Phil and Lil from the Rugrats a while ago. Yeah, and we were the Thundercats for
a Wile E. Kid and Wile E. Cat. Yeah,
that was fun. So yeah, like sometimes we like to play off of that too. It just, especially if we're just hanging out and like having a good time, like it's fun to just pick those like maybe simpler silhouette costumes just because they're funny, or I like to try out new techniques personally. That's my like driving force for finding a new cosplay. I love like tinkering and watching tutorials for how to do, weird things I'd never thought of doing before. So that's a big driver for me. If I can figure out doing something weird, I'm definitely.
It's weird. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's been the most challenging skill you've had to learn?
Ooh, so many. I think what's great about cosplay is that there's so many people who are self-taught. And I think, there's lots of different ways to go into it. But I mean, for sewing's great. We're both mostly self-taught. I think, Tiffany mentioned she had done like one sewing class in like the 7th grade, and we got like taught how to hand sew from our grandma. So the rest of it, like how to do French seams, how to do, how to make felt seams, how to make corsets, whatever, is largely like, oh, we'll figure this out like as we go or whatever. So that's been really kind of challenging. Foam work is one of the areas of cosplay that I love. It's kind of taking this sort of EVA foam. If you're not familiar with what that is, if you think of like that like sort of craft foam letters that like, you can buy at the craft store that like has like little letter A or like little stars that have glitter or whatever on it. It's that. And that's kind of how folks make armor. That's an entirely self-taught arena of costuming, and it's become such a huge portion of cosplay. So trying to figure those pieces out. I think we've done enough now, which is nice, to where we're at the point, like, I could probably figure it out, you know what I mean? But I think that initial of like, okay, we should dabble in a whole bunch of things and really work through these skills to hone them, was super challenging.
I guess like if I had to pick one specific project that was like the learning curve was super, super steep, was probably the first time I built a suit of armor. Because I used, if you're familiar with the character Rossler from Final Fantasy 12, he's like this really gaudy white and gold mess. And I've never worked with, I'd worked with foam before, but I'd never worked with a thermoplastic called Warbla. It's a material that you can heat up, and it usually makes your material you can put it over foam and it makes it rigid and won't move around too much and won't bend and things. So it was my first time working with that. It's both expensive and fiddly. And I had never built a suit of armor before, and I was like, oh my God. So I had to learn so many new things kind of at once putting that costume together. There's a lot of frustration. I learned the hard way. Warbler tends to melt if you heat it up. And I left it in my car on a warm day.
I remember that.
Yeah, melted my roll. So that's pretty mad. But I did learn not to do that anymore.
Right.
So it's just a whole different, unlike sewing. Sewing has its own, it's also difficult, but there's not like Tamarah was saying, there's no school for foam work. You don't have, since the dawn of time, people have been sewing. So it's not like quite that, that's not the case for, EVA foam. So you kind of have to just read tutorials and guess and play around with it a little bit until you can get it right. And there's more tutorials now than there were at the time that I made that costume. But, the learning curve was pretty steep.
Now, are you guys like this in the rest of your life where you're like, oh, that's a challenge. That's really an interesting puzzle. I have to figure that out.
I think that there's definitely areas of my real life that's like that, but probably not as much. I'm a very anxious person by nature. I don't like risk. I do not like, whatever. But I'm also the kind of person who will needle something to death of like, I've got to figure this out. I've got to understand this in its full completion or else like it won't work. Or I just can't sleep until I figure out how this is supposed to work. I've had a lot of jobs that reflect that, right? Like right now I'm an investigator. Prior to that, I did conduct work, student conduct and things like that. So those kinds of things really fit well to me of like problem solving. But I think what's nice about cosplay is that one, it's like this nice artistic exploration that you can do. So it kind of relaxes me in that way of like, okay, I'm going to figure this out, but it's like for fun. Like I don't have to figure this out for like someone's life. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day if this doesn't work out because it's for fun. Also a lesson I had to learn. And I think, I think cosplay is also, like I said, at least for me, I'm a relatively introverted person. And so to get to go and be on a stage and perform or to, represent this character and do fun spins and twirls or singing on stage, which is something like, I never would have done in another life, I think is just a cool way of kind of contrasting those two identities.
Yeah, I would say Tamarah's definitely more the nervous duck. I'm a little bit anxious too about that kind of thing, but I'm a little bit more adventurous. I'll try different stuff. I studied abroad when I was an undergrad, so a couple times actually. And I'm usually, if I think it's interesting, I'll probably go and see if I can do it. So cosplay, obviously the risk is way less than my real job. There's not really there's no life or death situation with cosplay really. Unless you make a stupid mistake. You really messed up if it's life or death.
Right.
But usually it's not the case, for cosplay like it is in real life. So while I'm a little bit more okay with taking some calculated risks in real life, I'm much more interested in I can buy this interesting chemical I've never worked with before or try this new product I've never worked with before. It's probably not going to blow anything up. So let's try it.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not. Most likely. There've only been a few expensive damages to date. So, yeah.
That's hilarious. Now, do you guys ever cosplay individually or is it always as a team?
We started out actually we did together, but then we broke apart and did kind of our own thing for a minute. And then we got back together. So since most of our cosplaying is usually as a duo for competitions, we usually just do it at the same together. But it is nice. Lately, I guess pre-quarantine, we decided to take on individual projects just to give ourselves some space so we don't have to compromise on anything. We can just do whatever it is that we want. But before, I guess the first two contests that we competed at, we both competed separately. And then we're going from the same series. We might as well compete together and realize that was a possibility. But most of the time, it's nice to have somebody to bounce ideas off of or to act as a, I don't know,
bane
and a boon to your cosplay projects.
Now, what has been the costume that has absolutely challenged you the most?
Oh my God. Right now, I think most recently has been, I'll do the Sakizo one.
Really?
I don't know. Well,
you know what? I would say it's that mole trace and Articuno costume.
Right.
I'm sorry, you can pick your own side, Tamara.
You go first, because I got to think about it.
Okay, yeah. For me, it was definitely the mole trace and Articuno cosplay we did. Ooh, I forget what year. 2017, maybe? 18? I don't remember. A couple years ago. I have a little bit of an Icarus complex in that I like to try things, and they don't always work out, despite my best intentions, but these costumes involve making a set of articulating wings that open and close with the press of a garage door opener button.
Oh my
And
God.
like I was like, oh, I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. I found some tutorials online for how to do it, or at least pieced some tutorials together for how to do it. Our dad's an electronic technician. I was like, we'll figure it out. But you know that saying, like the children of shoemakers go without shoes? That none of that knowledge was ever really connected. Like my dad and I sat in the basement trying to wire these actuators together for hours. I was like, I don't get it. And, eventually it kind of came together, but it was also it was a much needed failure because I was like, all right. It was a slice of humble pie, knowing that not everything's going to work out the way that you want it to. And sometimes you bite off a little bit more than you should chew. But that was a really, really major project, well outside of my skill level. I learned a lot about electronics, only caused one spark, some smoke a little bit. Nobody died, no fires, but some sparks. It was kind of expensive mistake, but yeah, that was definitely one of the most challenging, I think.
Yeah. Oh God, that was a rough year. Those actuators were so expensive, but they weren't good ones either. I think.
Yeah, I bought cheap ones. I was trying to save money. It would still end up being kind of expensive, but I bought some cheapo actuators that were like refurbished, and because of that, I think they weren't wired properly, and the garage door opener device thingies that I had used were also kind of cheap. So
we learned that like when you press one, the other one like active. It was wild. Anyway, I was like, oh my God. I think for me, the most challenging one that I done was this Sakizo Juliet dress that was my most recent contest piece. And that was last year, only because there were so many elements on it. And as per who we are, as people, we never plan with enough time. I think we're like, oh, this will take like 4 months. It'll be fine. And really it would like need to take 6 or more. And I think we also had a lot of other stuff going on at the time. So just poor to begin with. And then like a poor plan to begin with. And then Juliet has a lot of different intricate pieces, right? Like, I mean, that thing had 5 skirts. The sleeves were 72 parts together. It had like advanced smocking, which is a sort of like historical decorative spandex making. I cast a bunch of resin gems for it. I had 2 different corsets I was wearing. I mean, it was a hot disaster. And so I was like, well, and I think like that I stressed out so much over that costume, and because there's so many details that are not even going to be seen. So I was so annoyed. I was like, you're not even going to see this. It's like underneath all these skirts. I have like all this decorative gold work you're not even going to see. But it was just so much going on. And we were taking it to a convention out of town. Like it ended up being good. We won best in our class, which was great. But just the stress level of getting there, I was like, this is not worth it. I do not like the idea of crying over a freaking ball gown. Like, who do I look like crying over a dress, you know? So, but I did, and I was like, this is just not worth it. So it really kind of forced me to like step back and think, okay, we need to learn when to set boundaries for ourselves of like, when's time to stop, you know, whatever. So, yeah.
Do you have multiple projects on the go at the same time?
See, yeah, that's the problem, is we don't do a good job of that. I think it's essential to take a break, but usually we have like a million things going on at once. I mean, we both compete. We also run several contests that are relatively a high level. We're involved in so many areas of cosplay community and running groups and running organizations, and, you know, just so much is happening all the time with us. So I think COVID has also been like a good moment of like, oh, we didn't really build much this entire year. I think we built one costume kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And that was been like a moment for us to be like, okay, like we got to take a step back and really reassess what our time looks like.
And like, for me personally, like I'm really bad about stopping to smell the flowers. I get super energized right after a contest. Actually, that same contest she was just talking about, I was like, okay, I'm done competing for a while. I want to break. But as soon as we were in the car on the way back home, I was like, you know what we should do? Let's build a different costume. So I get really energized by like post contests. So I'm like ready to go.
Yeah.
It's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah. So anyone like thinking about cosplay, do not do that. It's terrible. We are trying to not. I think we both have like relatively perfectionist and obsessive personalities. So that's kind of just par for the course. But yeah, it should be fun. You should take breaks. You shouldn't really like push yourself to do more than you're capable of doing financially, energy-wise, time-wise, any of it.
It's hard when you get excited though. You're like, yeah, let's make things.
Exactly, right? Like,
yeah,
oh, I could
like,
do
I found a new shiny thing. I gotta build. That looks cool.
Yeah.
I love spending hours online looking at tutorials, and like the shopping for supplies is like my favorite part.
Oh, so good.
Finding things, and you're just like, oh, this is such a cool thing. I can't wait to buy it and play with it.
Yeah.
So that's the best part.
Yeah.
Now, what's your holy grail costume? Like, what's the one that you're like, oh, I'm going to make that someday, but I'm not ready yet.
Ooh, okay. Tamarah refuses to let me do this because we don't have space. But I really want to build a Gundam, specifically the Death Scythe Gundam from Gundam Wing. It is huge.
Sorry, can you explain what Gundam is?
Yeah. I'll let Tamarah take it away since it's her favorite.
Gundam is my favorite anime series. It's basically these sort of giant mecha units that, based on, depending on what series, are piloted by people in a sort of military-esque anime. It's great. And so, but they're massive and they're very blocky and huge. And the only way to get it to look right in proportion is to make them gigantic. I mean, we're talking 8 feet, 6 feet, that kind of thing, and of just blocky
robot
body with, like, I mean, you know, we're talking gun cannons, like, it's a mess. So no, we do not have the room for that. Thank you.
We're gonna get a storage unit. We'll see if I can get a storage unit. It's got like these giant bat wings and a huge scythe. Like, this thing is probably 8 or 9 feet tall. So, you know, I'd like to build it 8 or 9 feet. Thanks.
Oh my God.
So it would be really cool. I just picture walking into a convention, you know, the first day going as the pilot, so, you know, unsuspecting, and then the second day, bam, 8-foot tall robot walking in the door.
Can't wait for the staff to have to remove the T-bar in the doorway to get through. They'll be so mad. I can't.
I won't take off the staff. I'll look up the rules first. But that's my goal costume, is like a Gundam.
I don't know that I have one, to be honest. I am also kind of like, I'll be on Pinterest and be like, oh, that'd be cool. Or like, you know, there's this anime or this video game that I really enjoy. Like, that'd be fun one day. Usually when contest season comes around, I'm like, ooh, I really want to make that costume. I'm a real big fan of like Sakizo work. She's an illustrator out of Japan who makes these really amazing and detailed costumes and dresses. They're usually ball gowns, which for whatever reason I just have a thing for these days. So probably something from that. But I don't know, I really enjoyed making armor recently. I've been making like some magical weapons and staffs, which has been fun. So something like that, like a giant warrior princess of some kind with a giant ball gown and a giant weapon. That'd be cool.
When you go to a con, so when you're not actually, you know, performing in the contest, so you're walking around the show floor, going to panels, like what's the day in the life of a con?
Ooh, good. So we haven't gone to a con for fun in a long time. Usually we work them. So, but I would say most people go, they identify what panels they want to see. So usually they'll have like voice actor panels or meet different celebrities, or there's fan panels that are put on by other people that like your like certain series, and they'll just be like discussions or games or things like that. We often run a lot of panels. So we've done some panels based off of cosplay. We do like a cosplay horror stories panel that we just talk about all the really interesting things that have happened to us over the past like 15 years of like cosplay. And like some game shows too. I do one on Japanese culture. Or so you just walk around, there's a vendor hall where you can buy different merchandise and cool like action figures or trinkets or collector's items. Yeah, all sorts of fun stuff, food. It's a great place to hang out with your friends. So if you haven't seen them in a while, you get to, you know, get together. When we go out of town, like Chicago or Denver, we meet our group of friends over there. So it's really fun to hang out with them. You know, and just like to be around other people that celebrate the thing that you like to celebrate. Sometimes we get stuck in picture traps, which is when you're in a costume and people just kind of flood you asking for pictures. We got held up at C2E2 a while ago for what was like 2 hours. Yeah. Just like taking pictures. It was awesome. It was really cool to like, you know, to be in that environment. The energy was great, but we were supposed to be at a photo shoot at the very end of the hallway and we could see it, but we were stuck in that one spot for an hour. Totally missed it. 2 hours. I totally missed it. So it was pretty funny. Yeah. But yeah, you can go and get your picture taken, go do group shoots together. Yeah.
There's also a lot of events sometimes that the conventions will put on, parades that go throughout. You know, you can, sometimes they put like, what's the word? It's not scavenger hunt. What am I thinking of? Like, they do like, they hide stuff. I guess that's a scavenger hunt. I don't know. Scavenger hunt, right? They do scavenger hunts that you can participate in. Some places do like, you know, fandom related tastings. So like sake tastings at anime conventions or like different food panels. One convention we love, they do a pancake panel. So they make like if you've seen like Dan cakes, that's the kind of thing they do. It's awesome. Panel viewings, you can watch shows with people and do like kind of talkbacks of like, okay, like let's really pull our full nerd hats on and like really dissect this specific media source from a sociocultural lens, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, it is also kind of what you make it. Some shows are so big that there's different tracks. Like maybe you're an anime fan, so you go through this track of programming that's been outlined for you. Or maybe you're super into sci-fi. Well, here's this track. Maybe you're super into like literature or sci-fi writing. So like these are the panels and the people that you'll want to kind of meet. So yeah, and then there's parties too. I think a lot of folks go there to kind of let loose a little bit, go wild. So I don't know. I feel like I'm getting old, but it's fun. It can be a lot of fun to party in with your friends from out of state and out of other countries. So yeah, it's a good time. It's a really good time.
Yeah. And so obviously during COVID, that's not possible, but I know you guys put on kind of a virtual mini con back in October. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what that was about?
Yeah, we've done a couple. I think for some of the conventions that we work with most frequently, we did like some sort of online programming for online shows, right? Like we did online cosplay contests and panels. But then the two of us together kind of had this brainchild, again, sitting in Tiffany's car of like, you know what, we're really like, this pandemic has been such a horrible situation, and I think it's been so bad on the creator community, particularly for folks of color, and just kind of losing that community and the creators. So we launched POC CreateACon, which was this cool sort of conference, if you will, of creators from all different walks of life coming together to do host panels, for us to network, to share, to just kind of build that sense of community back. It was totally free. We did it through Zoom. And we're going to be doing it again this coming October, so stay tuned for that. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a different animal. You have to think about people's attention spans are usually pretty short anyway, and but doing it from your computer, especially after we've all been in lockdown for a while, you have to really make the content as engaging as possible. Some of the shows we work for, a lot of shows are in financial strains because of the impact of not being able to host a show. So that's been a great way to either, post fundraising links or to crowdfund and do those kinds of things to promote the event itself, and connect with people that you haven't seen in 2 years, So it is a different animal managing technology. I think that this did force us to learn how to use technology in meaningful ways, how to create paneling and programming that we hope is interesting, while at the same time tying back into the roots of why we all did this in the first place, is because we like, celebrating different forms of media, anime, video games, literature, sci-fi, all that good stuff. So, yeah.
You run a website for people of color in cosplay. What are the unique challenges for people of color, and especially women of color in cosplay? And then how does your website address that?
Yeah. Oh, God. So it's one of those things. First of all, a lot of people don't realize that people of color, women of color, cosplay. Frankly, it is most of the articles and big media sources that you see representing cosplay tend to represent only white women that are of a certain size. So it is nice to have representation. I'm one of the admins of the POC cosplayers group on Facebook. And it's kind of important to showcase that we're out here doing the things that are just as good as our white counterparts are. We're just as involved in cosplay community outreach, building, making all those things. We're out here. And so sometimes we get overlooked because of the same racist themes that take place in regular life. It still extends into the cosplay community, alongside the negative comments about cosplaying as like the black version of whatever, and then whatever slurs you get along with that. You get the additional comments of being a woman in cosplay, and you get the same comments of being, whatever gender identity you might hold, or being a member of the LGBTQIA community, or having abilities or disabilities. All that same stuff impacts us the same way that it does in the white communities. It's just mixed in there with race. So it's all those things kind of combined together, as well as access and opportunity. So, I think it is a big challenge, I think, for people to realize that, or I shouldn't say it's a big challenge for people of color, cosplayers, to get known and get noticed and get their work represented out there, just because, the nature of the beast. A lot of these big media outlets are only after a certain type of cosplayer. And we're pushing to get that changed, get some people to recognize that this is not okay and that we're out here doing things.
And I think, weirdly, I shouldn't say weirdly, I think it's just one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit in the cosplay community, especially with like kind of some of those like larger media sources. I mean, blackface is really huge in the community. It's become it's just weird to think like, okay, like we're well past these like minstrel shows. Most people know, you kind of expect to see that kind of thing on Halloween, but that's really a big part of something that we've been trying to work against in cosplay, is people doing blackface and then getting, money and paid advertisements and promotions from large scale corporations for blackfacing effectively. Right. And so I know, like, right, I tell people this, they're like, what are you talking, like, no, I mean, a white cosplayer usually will darken their tone or skin tone, or tape their eyes to appear more Asian, or all these sorts of like just ridiculous things that we all know are problematic. But the excuse is, well, it's for cosplay, like it's just for fun, like it's not a real, like I'm running to be accurate, right? No, that's not what we're doing, right? Like this is hugely offensive. But I mean, people never really take that time to step back and ask the community of color like their opinions of what this representation looks like and what it does. So that's been a huge part of our work too, is kind of trying to, one of the things we do is particularly writing policy with the shows that we run of like blackface is not acceptable, neither is mimicking national tragedies or other sort of racial or slurs or things like that in shows to kind of help combat some of those issues.
And how about the experience at the con itself? Do you kind of work with them on making a safer space?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of that is in the policy work that we do. Tamarah's done some trainings for like bystander intervention. So if you see something, do something, don't let that person just sit there and suffer in silence. Or there's other ways you can combat it other than just like actively intervening. But Tamarah's done some training for that. I think a lot of what we do is we try and create spaces that are zero tolerant for that kind of thing, both in what we say during the convention, like when we're in panels and things like that. We're like, this is a zero tolerance area for discrimination of any kind. Won't handle it, will not tolerate it. Working with the access control of the convention security to get those people on the same page of like, look, if you see this, they get kicked out, take their badge, done.
Yeah.
So we also do a lot of work online with, we've written some statements and written some ideas and suggestions for trainings and so all that kind of stuff. All of it goes into trying to create a safe space. I think it's holistic. You can't just like start in one spot. You got to kind of attack all of it.
Yeah. And what's nice too is like, I mean, cosplay community, as big and vast as it is relatively small. So we were able to also create some community with other cosplay contest runners, other, convention show runners to really talk about like, okay, how can we make our conventions that are built on this idea of being inclusive and sort of celebrating nerd culture, which is already looked down upon in society, right? Like, how can we create a more inclusive environment for our already marginalized identities? And what's been nice is I'd say by and large, people are on board for that. You get the occasional person who chooses not to engage in that way. But for the most part, I think it's definitely work in progress for sure. But I think it's nice that this is a more willing community to address some of those things, which is good.
I'm still kind of just gobsmacked about the blackface thing. That's
really my gosh, it's so bad. Yeah.
What are you doing?
What is wrong with you?
People don't think. I mean, if you remember the movie, I think it came out a long time, like Cloud Atlas, right? And no one batted an eye at the aggressive amount of blackface in there, right? No one even said anything. And I was like, and so it's that kind of mindset of like, it's just art, like it's just, movies, it's just media, but there's so much harm done by things like that. So
I think people forget that it's just because you're in costume, that doesn't take you out of the social environment that you're in. We don't live in a vacuum. The impacts of our social environment impact us in cosplay, even when we're in the convention center.
Still black walking into the convention.
Still black.
Oh my God. Well, I'm sure for some people, they're like, well, this is just a chance for me to kind of live out. I don't know what to say.
Absolutely. Yeah, they really think like this is my chance. It's really based on this idea of being shocking, is that's really all it is, if it comes down to it. Because a lot of times, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of times people, they're like, I just want to have this accuracy moment of having my skin tone look this way. Okay, well, your costume doesn't fit. You know what I mean? Like there's so many other, like you didn't paint this, So like
you're only worried
about the blackface, but none of the rest of the costume, So it can't be about accuracy. It's got to be for shock value, So I don't get it.
It's never a good thing either. Yeah. They think people forget that not all press is good press. Like that's just not, we've seen people lose contracts because they have blackfaced in an event and lost sponsorships and lost deals. So it's a real issue. You're gonna, I always say like hell hath no fury like the POC cosplay community scorned, and they will come after you. So just don't do it.
So you guys have mentioned a couple times like contracts and deals and professional cosplayers. Who's making these deals? Who are they making contracts with?
There's like a couple of like really big name cosplayers that people know of, right? Like they have, hundreds of thousands of followers online. They're really well established. And they get, sponsorship with like PlayStation or with, like some of the like really big important brand companies that produce media. And that's awesome. That's a very small percentage of the cosplay community though. So if you're looking to like make, $100,000 a year off of costuming, like it's not an easy thing to be. I mean, it's a full-time job. It's a lot harder than people think. But what's been nice too is, in the last couple of years, micro influencing has become really big. And so if you have a decent social media following or a good member of the community, companies and brands will reach out to you to be like, hey, like, can you use our product? We'll send it to you for free if you would be willing to, work to do a couple posts a month or whatever about it. And, this paint or this like adhesive or this prop or whatever, just kind of talk about it. That's been really nice too. So there's a lot more access, I think, to working with brands in that way recently, which has been pretty cool.
And you can also work with different conventions too. So sometimes we show up as guests at places. So you'll write up a contract being like, okay, well, we'll agree to pay you X amount for an appearance fee. If you get an appearance fee, we'll pay you a per diem, your hotel, in exchange for you judging the cosplay contest and, doing several hours of programming. So it's a lot of work. Like, I think people are like, ooh, free ride to get a convention. No. You're working the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's like preparing, it's work, but that's a great way. So, you write up contracts, you kind of negotiate a little bit sometimes about what your asks are and what you're willing to provide and what they're willing to provide you. And you have a good dialogue about it. It is something that I think is coming up more and more for cosplayers. Maybe in the past, maybe 5 or 6 years, I think conventions, contracts and guest contracts and that kind of thing have been a lot more commonplace. So it's really nice to see it becoming a little bit more professionalized, I suppose.
So what has been the most surprising thing for you about being involved in cosplay?
I guess I didn't realize how much of my life it was going to take over. You know what I mean? I think it's one of those things where, like, you think you show up to a convention to have a good time. It's a weekend, you spend like, at the time when we first started, like, 3 days putting together a costume, whatever, you go and it's kind of done over and you geek out about it for the next year. But I mean, then there for a while, we were going to 6 or 7 conventions a year or like competing. And then we started working with shows to make them. We started doing consultation. We started doing brand ambassadorship. We started, just kind of really getting into the community. And it has taken, it's almost as much work as my full-time job. It's probably more actually. Cause as soon as I get off work, I'm like, all right, cosplay thing, So I love that element of it. I think it's just so much more than kind of putting on a costume and wearing it. Now, granted, it doesn't have to be that. That's just kind of what we've made it to be. But there's such a great depth of community. There's so many great opportunities. I had done some event planning back in a former job and I can like apply those skills to my cosplay life, putting on large 1,500 person attendee events, like this is great.
Sorry, I didn't mean
no, you're good.
I was gonna say I totally agree with you on the transferability of the skills that you do. You're like, oh, I'm just at home sewing a dress. No, you could really do some cool stuff. Like, particularly with the pandemic, I was just feeling really down, but realizing, oh wait, we can make masks. I know how to sew. I can be useful. So that was like a neat thing to like, okay, well, there's some transferable skills here that you can showcase. And like Tamarah said, we've done event planning both in our professional lives, but that really helped when it came to when we started doing convention planning and running large scale events, just moving amounts of people, things to think about that you wouldn't even think you would need to like worry about. You're like, oh, we need to have waivers for this, or we need to have contracts for this. Like, it's just having experience in those areas has transferred over really nicely to like both in-person jobs or other endeavors. And so it's not just, hanging out and geeking out with your friends all the time. It can be, like Tamarah said, it can be, but there's a lot of things you can get involved with that really improve other elements of your life. I think I'm a little more handy around the house. Literally, I'm still lazy, but like, like, oh, I know what this tool is for besides, screwing in bolting my wings to my back brace. I can, fix the faucet if I wanted to. So those kinds of things.
If we wanted to.
Yeah, I wanted to. I don't want to.
I would say even the people skills too. Both of us in former jobs have had to have like, crisis management skills or like, how to de-escalate situations or just like general, empathetic listening or whatever. There's no greater moment of tension than when you're like 2 minutes before you walk on stage and your costume falls apart and this person's like bawling on the floor and you've got to go help that person like get it together, right? So I think that's also been kind of interesting. I'm like, oh, like I just, you think outside looking in like it's just a dress. Well, no, you spent like 1,000 hours on this, right? Like you're breaking down backstage. Who's gonna help? Get it together. And it's been nice because I think both of us at least are empathetic in that way and can kind of help our fellow person in green room to get that stuff together. So it's just wild, just the connection of life skills that get applied to cosplay.
I'm sure there's a lot, but what are the big misconceptions about cosplay that just drive you insane?
I think maybe number one is that the cosplay community is sometimes branded as being more catty than any other community, or like catty or like bullying and petty. It's really not any worse than any other ones out there. It's the same people that you deal with on a day-to-day life, you all just happen to like the same TV show. You know what I mean? So I think that sometimes people get the perception that we are a lot worse than other communities sometimes. Well, that's not the case. We're just as bad. Not necessarily worse.
Yes, if this person's a jerk in cosplay, they're also a jerk out of cosplay. Like, that's just a consistent life narrative. It's fine. Yeah.
Or like, you know, maybe it's not a serious thing. Like, I think sometimes people think that cosplay, and it can be, and there's nothing wrong with just like throwing on a costume and like being like, yay, for like a couple hours. But I think some people don't, when you do put a lot of effort and energy into a costume, I think some people do brush that off as being like a no big deal, or like, oh, whatever, I could do that in my sleep. Like, well, could you know? I think some people downplay some of the effort that does go into cosplay a lot of times.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah, that's probably about it. I think, you know, everyone kind of thinks that because cosplay can be such a choose your own adventure thing that everybody's level of effort is the same, and that's not the case. Any type of sort of modeling or what's the word, like sort of creator media takes so much effort, especially with a social media game. I mean, trying to manage your social media accounts to grow your following. I mean, that takes so much. I mean, yeah, you probably know, right? Working with Instagram and your own work, right? Like it takes so much work to maintain that stuff.
That's why there's marketing jobs.
That's why there's marketing jobs. Exactly. So, but you know, as a cosplayer, you're your own agent and marketer and, you know, you're artist and builder. And so it's just kind of a lot. So I think I agree with you. Yeah.
Those are the two biggest ones.
So if someone listening got really fired up about this conversation and they wanted to get into cosplay, where would you suggest they get started?
First of all, yay, that's awesome. Please do. Yes. It can be overwhelming, I think, because there's just so much detail. But I always tell people, right, like it's important to learn the game before you learn the strategy. Like you can learn the bells and whistles and all the like fancy stuff that you can do later on. If you're we're kind of the kind of people who like to jump in and just do things at a breakneck speed. But I think that can be very intimidating for people. So I say, like, you know, if there's a character that you really like, go for it. You know what I mean? It just kind of start from the ground up of like, do I want to build this? Do I want to make this? What do I want my experience to be? Right? Like, am I choosing to cosplay because it just sounds like it'd be fun? Great. Like you can buy a costume offline and wear it at a convention or take a photo and post it online. Are you interested in like, okay, like I feel like I really want to learn how to sew. Like I want to try and make this thing. Awesome. Like, okay, what's your budget? You know, how can you think about how much time it's going to take you to learn the skill? There's a lot of really great online communities that you can join to kind of ask questions. Sometimes I'm touch and go with some of those for beginners because you have to know what it is that you need to ask in order to be able to do it. You know what I mean? But I think Kamui Cosplay has this great line of kind of cosplaying for beginner books that you can buy as well. And they kind of talk you through like, okay, here's the basics of crafting and like how to start. But yeah, I think a lot of people get like stuck on the like, oh, how do I do it? Like, how do I get involved? Like, what do I do? And truly just do it. You know what I mean? Put on a costume.
I would say, yeah, start with what it is that you want. Do you want to pick a character? That's my first thing to tell them. Like, what if they're like, I want to start cosplaying. How do I get started? What character do you like? Who do you see yourself being able to do? And when you're doing that, think about what are your skills? Do you want to make it yourself? Do you have the money to do it, to buy your own? Do you want to go to a convention and hang out with people, or are you just wanting to take pictures for social media? So just starting off with deciding what it is that you actually want to do will help guide a lot of that other stuff. I don't see the point in taking an entire course on sewing if you just need to learn. I like to learn the skill for the costume or for the project rather than like taking an entire course to learn 15,000 things I don't need to know. Which is maybe a bane or a boon depending on the thing. Sometimes you miss some stuff, but personally, I pay more attention when I'm doing it because I need to know it. So if you don't need to know how to sew when you're making a suit of armor, don't take a sewing class. Watch tutorials on how to make armor, you know? So you don't have to start on a skill just because everybody else is doing it. Just start with what makes sense for whatever costume it is that you want to bring to life. And then think about, you know, when you want to make it, when you want to debut it, and where you want to wear it. And don't get into the weeds too much until you've kind of like settled on that part. It can get overwhelming quick, especially when you see all the fancy stuff people are doing, but you need to decide if you even like it first, you know, before you spend all the money, time, and energy and stress.
Ladies, thank you so much for taking so much time and having just a lovely conversation. I had so much fun.
Yes, us too. Thank you so much for having with us. This was awesome.
If you'd like to learn more about Pro and Con or cosplay in general, you can find them on Instagram and Facebook at Pros and Cons Cosplay. I'll include links in the show notes, as well as links to other cosplay resources and a list of their favorite nonprofits, as well as my own. Just a reminder that you can find this podcast on Instagram at Love What You Love Pod, on Twitter at What You Love Pod, and the website is lovewhatyoulovepod.com. All of the transcripts for Love What You Love are available for everyone on the website, thanks to Emily White, transcription virtuoso and proprietress of the Wordary. The music for Love What You Love is called Inspiring Hope by Pink Sounds. A link to that artist is included in the show notes. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Let's hang out again soon.
There's some good in this world, Mr. Furl. And it's worth fighting for.